Welcome back to this Boosted Films video series as we continue to fix and restore one of the rustiest EVOs in America. And in this episode, we're going to finish installing our JDM fuel tank, and we're also going to add an electronic boost controller, a wideband gauge, and some larger fuel injectors. And by the end of the video, we'll have the EVO rolling on the ASM all-wheel drive dyno. So here we are with the brand new JDM fuel tank. One of the first things we're going to go over is the safety valve, if you will. This needed to still be tweaked, to my surprise. As you can see, the markings here, I had to drill these holes a little bit bigger to get this to fit right. It just didn't want to completely line up perfectly. Maybe a JDM difference since it's a JDM tank and a US market, safety valve thing here. So I just drilled those out a little bit bigger so it would fit a little easier. And then, of course, went ahead and just bolted that in place. I also bought some new nuts to hold these components in. You can see on the screen here. These are actually considered like fog lamp nuts or something like that, but they must be a pretty universal nut as far as what they can all, be bolted to. So I bought a bunch of these new nuts so I could put all new nuts on this fuel tank since, again, my old tank was super rusty, and so were the nuts that were holding everything down. And we also swapped the hose that ran from this safety valve here. Next, I want to talk about this part number that's on the screen here. They say this is the one for the passenger side sending unit, but the one you actually need is this, the MB400461. This is what you would need. I've actually done this in the past in a previous video from my black EVO build. I had to change this after it started leaking. So that's the gasket you need if you want to change this side of the fuel sending unit. And have no fear, I am working on a different video for this, a video specifically about the fuel tank and all the part numbers and stuff like that you'll need. I'm going to work on that video when I have time. Sometimes these detailed how-to videos and stuff, more informative videos, take a bit more time to create, and right now I'm just trying to focus on keeping these video blogs updated, but I will post more about the JDM swap and more about all these components. And as you can see here, I also changed out this little fuel filter on this side. I definitely don't think I had to do it, but it was a cheap little piece and I picked that up. So we're showing that on the screen here too, so if you ever need something to reference with your EVO fuel tank, you could check that out. And this gasket was pretty bad. It was definitely dried up and crappy, so I'm glad I got a new one so I could swap in that new gasket. I did want to get this whole piece new if I could have, but I couldn't find it. It's not available anymore. I mentioned this previously, I believe, but it's going to be a rare piece, probably getting more hard to find along, with the fuel tank itself. You can't get a US market fuel tank anymore. So I dropped that in place and, of course, bolted it in. And I'm going to show you a little tip for this. The gasket where it pulls through, the part that's protruding up, one of them ends up being right in front of where you would connect a clip. And basically what you want to do is just cut that rubber piece. Once you've pulled it through, cut a portion of it off just to make it easier to plug that piece in. So if you're changing out this gasket, just cut a little piece of that top off, and that should make things easier as you go to reassemble. Next, we're going to pull out the actual fuel pump hanger that's on the driver's side of the tank. And because this filter or sock, as you call it, that was on this fuel pump looked pretty dirty, I ordered a new one and I am just swapping that out. Again, might as well do it while I'm in there. And of course, this pump was previously ran in my old tank, which was pretty rusty and pretty dirty inside, so it seemed like a good thing to swap out. When you do swap it out, if you're doing something like this, that little rubber piece I just put in, you want to make sure that you have that in there. Otherwise, your pump could potentially push out of the housing, causing a lean situation, and you don't want that. So make sure your fuel pump is, in there snug and holding up tight. There's 3 clips on that plastic piece that hold it in place, so make sure that's in there and holding it up well. And of course, another new OEM gasket that I decided to change. This one I don't think I needed to, but while you're doing everything, I guess, go ahead, change it out. And also, just because, as I mentioned, I want to make a video kind of showing all the parts that you need for this, I figured it would be good just to have that included in that video as well. So here's just a close-up shot of this actual fuel pump hanger, this fuel pump assembly. This is what it looks like from the factory. just kind of putting this on screen again for reference if someone really needs to see what things look like, especially if you're putting something back together, if you bought different pieces or something in yours broke. This can get you a feel for what it looks like. Next, we're going to move on to one of the items that you really need to actually kind of create to make this JDM tank work. And so I'm going to show you here where this hose runs from. This is the fill hose, and this is the smaller tube. It's basically just a vent tube as far as I understand, and it runs through and above. It's a tricky spot to get to, and you can see it here next to the fill hose. There's basically the fill hose itself and then kind of this breather hose. So this probably could work. You probably could just bolt it on, tighten it up. Honestly, you probably could. I went a little overkill, and I just figured more people would want to do it this way too, potentially, if you're doing a JDM swap, just to make sure everything kind of fits a bit better. So what you're really doing here is just kind of making a new piece of hose, and then you're making an adapter in between to kind of change the actual size of it, because it's going to be a larger end that's going to kind of go to the car, and then because this JDM tank has a smaller fitting on the tank itself where you connect this vent tube, you're going to use the smaller hose on that side. So again, I feel like I did total overkill. Like, I used fuel hose here. I used this, piece that is E85 fuel compliant, everything. So you could basically be filling fuel through this, and it would probably be fine. But that's what I did. It took some time. As you can see, it looks a little bit long here, and it was a bit too long. I basically ended up cutting off about 3 inches from this. I had to put the fuel tank up, and then I realized it was way too long and had to drop the fuel tank back down, cut more of it off. But what you see on the screen here is a bit more detailed about what I did. It's the transition from the -8 to the -10, or however you say that, for the fuel lines. And I had about 7 inches of length for the smaller tube, and about 4 inches of length for the longer tube. And the actual length of each side probably doesn't matter as much. You probably just want this around that 11-inch total mark. And this is something that you could play with too if you were installing wherever you think would be the best spot to put that transition fitting. So now we're going to bring the car back up in the air and prep our fuel tank the rest of the way and try to get it tucked in place. So before we do that, I'm going to show you this new hose. I reattached the new hose to this fitting here where it goes to the fill, the breather fill. And you can see in here where that transition is, basically above that rear CV shaft. And this is again before I ended up cutting a bit more of it off to shorten it up. So there is that bar that holds your rear diff in place, and again you're going to have to loosen that up and lower your rear diff to get your fuel tank in or to remove it. So we're just doing that here. And next we're just going to add this hose, basically this transition hose, if you will, that runs fuel from one side to the other. And we're going to put that, you can clip that hose in place. It should pop in with those quick release connects. You'll want to put that in place before you start to lift your tank up. And here's just a quick walkover of the tank as it was before I was going to lift it up in place. And of course, what the car looks like. You can see that rear diff is hanging down a little bit. At least that top bar that's holding it in place is down basically 1/4 inch or a little bit more, because it's you need to get it in where those studs are sticking out to get it up in place. And the one thing that's nice about having a brand new tank is it's like completely empty. These tanks do have drains on them as well, but this made it lighter and a bit easier to actually put in place, being that it was brand new and completely empty. So the first thing I try to do is get it in basically where the rear part mounts to this tank, and I get those in place. Of course, you got to watch for the wiring harness in front. You also have to watch for your e-brake cables in front. Those items kind of make this job extra tricky. But the trickiest part of all this, I think, is really reconnecting that actual fuel fill hose, and of course that new hose recreated that vent hose as well. So what I ended up doing is basically getting that back part in place, those 2 back bolts, I should say, where this mounts up, the studs that it goes through. I got the tank hung up there, so basically it would tilt down towards the front of the car, and then you end up having to kind of make your arms long, get some long extensions, and then you got to reach up in there to try to basically get those hoses tight, get those clamps on, and get those hoses tight. I feel like it's worth mentioning now, and I usually try to mention in most of my videos, this you got to be careful when you're doing this stuff. I certainly recommend you take it to a professional if this is something you're thinking about doing. If anything else, hopefully after watching my video, you're like, yeah, I don't want to do this. So take it to someone, take it to the shop that'll do it for you if you're not comfortable with it, or, you know, of course, just do anything in this video at your own risk. I am simply showing what I did and what worked for me. So again, here we are above the tank, and I could not really show, you know, me actually doing this. It's hard enough to do it myself, let alone film while doing it. But I was able to get those hoses connected and then tighten up those clamps. This next bit is a little bit tricky as well. There's these two hard lines that go on the driver's side front of the tank. Those kind of run up to that fuel pump assembly itself, and then connect to where the lines run towards the back of the car. So this is another item that I don't, you know, have specific how-to on, unfortunately, as far as what order you want to do it in, and I just know you kind of have to watch for your e-brake cable and other brake lines, in my case, stuff like that. So it can be tricky. You may have to just take your time if you're trying to do this, and you know, of course, make sure you're not crimping anything or making anything like get pinched off. But we did have to reconnect those lines to the car, and then we lowered the car down and then went back inside the car to connect a few more items. Right now we're on the passenger side, and we need to reconnect whatever this is. Honestly, I'm not sure what this piece is here. Something maybe with pressure? I don't know. I really don't know what this is. Someone let me know. But just reconnecting this item here, tightening it back down. And of course, attaching all the lines. That one was just a transition line, should have already been attached. Some of the other plugins I did while I was actually lifting the tank in place when I could see them. And now we're on the driver's side. This is basically the main side where you would be like changing your fuel pump or anything. So we're gonna plug in the plugin that goes there and attach our feed line and our return line as well. Another spot where, as I'm remembering as I did this, is just in here you kind of want to watch for your like wiring harness. You want to make sure that wiring harness isn't really pinched between the tank and the body of the car when you're lifting the tank up in place. So as you can tell, it was a long job. It took me some time, and now it's getting dark out already. But just tightening up all the bolts to hold this in place. And then I didn't bother filming, you know, the fun stuff because it was so dark and everything. But, you know, I had to reinstall everything. Put your drive shaft back in. Put, you know, the exhaust back in. Tighten up your rear diff. All of those fun things. But this is it. The fuel tank is in, and I'm thinking, yes, this is great. It should work fine. I think it's all successful, right? No problems. Well, yeah, you know, that did look rusty to me. This is the fuel fill line, and all that finagling around and kind of bending stuff around, I caused it to leak. It didn't leak before, it does now. But the good news here is it only leaks while filling. So the car is more drivable now than it was before, because again, only while you're filling does it seem to leak. After that, it doesn't even seem to sweat. So that's good. But it is something I would like to, of course, fix. So I'm going to be on the lookout for a fuel fill hose. Of course, it's discontinued by Mitsubishi, and you can't find it anywhere. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. I may keep searching into JDM options. I can get a JDM fill hose. I'm just not sure if it's going to fit. And here's where a lesser YouTuber would probably just call it quits on this video and make another one, because it's better for the YouTube algorithm to have multiple videos. But I'm going to keep going, because otherwise I'm going to fall behind on these build updates. So the next thing I did was install Wideband. I finished installing the gauge, wired it up to get it working. This AM failsafe wideband is interesting to me because it actually runs, you can run a boost source to it, and you could kind of use it as a boost gauge if you wanted. As you can see here, it was running about 10 pounds of boost with that factory, you know, wastegate setup. But it's not really intended, I don't think, to be a dual gauge. It's more so that you could control boost if your wideband was, you know, if your AFRs were wrong. It's a fail-safe. It's supposed to do something if something's wrong. I'm not probably going to use it that way specifically. I just really wanted the wideband, and it is an added bonus that I could actually view the boost itself as well. But I'll probably touch more on that gauge later, potentially in a different video. As I mentioned, with the boost only being at about 10 pounds with the wastegate pressure, the next thing I wanted to do was install my Grimspeed electronic boost controller. Now, this is something you're not going to want to do, basically, unless you're able to control this boost controller. You'll need a boost gauge, an aftermarket boost gauge, to actually see where your boost is, and then you would need some sort of program to actually change this. So you need to be able to reflash your car, basically, to adjust the duty cycle of this. So this is something you're probably not going to want to do until right before you're putting your car on the dyno. And when you are hooking this up, there's a 1, 2, and 3 on this Grimspeed electronic boost controller. And for this particular application and me setting this up, number 1, you just leave to the atmosphere. Don't plug it or anything. Just leave it basically vented. The number 2 one, you will hook up to your wastegate. And number 3, you just want to hook up to a boost source. So basically I had number 3 ran to the nipple off the J-pipe, off the turbo. And number 2, I ran the hose to the wastegate. And in my case, of course, it's that internal stock wastegate actuator. And then what's nice about this one is it's made for the EVO, so it's got a bracket. You can kind of put it where the stock boost control solenoid would be. You'd remove your stock boost control solenoid, and you'd mount it with that same bracket, and then you just basically plug it in. It's kind of plug and play from there. It plugs into your stock OEM wiring harness, and then you should be able to, again, reflash that, or whatever you would use to tune your car. You should be able to adjust it that way. But again, I'm aware most people don't always have a way to reflash their car, so that's why I would recommend this. Is probably a discussion you'd want to have with your tuner if you were going to get your car tuned and wanted to add it. Talk to them about whether or not you could just install it at the shop while you're there, or if if they want to install it for you and it's how much they charge, whatever. But something you're going to do probably right before you would get a car tuned. And then I moved on to installing some FIC 1200cc high Z injectors. Again, a bit repetitive here if you're a longtime follower of mine. I did the same thing on my black EVO, did a bit more of a detailed video on that while Andy at ASM changed them for me. This one, I actually spent some time and did it myself, and it went better than I thought, changing the fuel injectors on this one. So since we're switching to E85, that's what we had to do. We got the larger injectors in, and then we had to pump out some of our old regular fuel, and then drive on over to the closest fueling station so I could fill it up with E85. And once all that was done, we were able to throw the car on the dyno and start some tuning. Now, of course, I'm no expert at tuning. That's why I bring it here to ASM. But, of course, for safety purposes and stuff, we just turned the wastegate duty cycle down, which means we turned the boost down and did some polls to see how everything was shaking out, watching our AFRs and stuff like that. So that's how we started with the dyno tuning process. And then we ran into not really hardly any issues, I wouldn't say, especially when it comes to dynoing and what you could run into in tuning. But what I found out, actually, which makes a lot of sense in hindsight, is I'm pretty sure I'm power limited here to what we're at, just under 350 horsepower were the final numbers we got out of this setup. And if you'll recall, my black EVO was around 425, 440, depending on the day. So this was down a decent amount, but one or two large differences here between this car and my black one is the O2 housing on this car is actually completely stock, whereas I have the external hood dump on my other one, and of course it's aftermarket. So that certainly allows more flow. And also the front mount intercooler on this one is OEM factory intercooler as well. So between those two items being stock, I would say 350 horse, 375 torque was the numbers. It is really not that bad. It's about to be expected. And I remember, looking back before I actually dynoed my black car, I was thinking 350, 375 horsepower is actually what I thought, especially being on that stock Evo 9 turbo. So that's where we're at right now. The car's running great on E85 and, pushing less than 350 horse, but pretty close to that marker. And it's going to be interesting. I'm kind of glad it shaped out this way, because I'm going to be very curious to see how much power limited, we may have been by this stock O2 housing setup and also that stock front mount intercooler. I'm most likely going to upgrade both of those components. I might try to do one at a time. I think it's more the O2 housing than it is the intercooler. So I'm going to try and change up my setup with that and then see if we can get closer to the horsepower mark of my black car. So that's about it for this video, guys. Sorry if I haven't documented everything as closely as you would like to see. Honestly, I was on a bit of a deadline for this. There's some spectator racing coming up that I wanted to get this car prepped and ready for. So depending on when you watch this, maybe that video will be out. You might have seen this silver car on the dirt track. So I wanted to get this car ready and out to do that. So sometimes for me, you know, getting a job done can prioritize making a video. So that's just kind of what it comes down to. I'm not a professional YouTuber by any means, and I don't make a living this way. So, you know, it's not always as much of a priority for me to get as detailed in the videos as it is to actually kind of enjoy myself with this hobby. But as always, I really do appreciate everyone watching. Again, I'm going to make a detailed video on the fuel tank stuff. So if you want that, hopefully that should be coming soon. If you are trying to do a JDM swap, reach out to me if you would like. I'm willing to talk about, you know, the process and what you might need to get that done if you are working on that on your car. And of course, if I did something wrong, let me know that as well. Continue the EVO discussion in the comment section of this video. And finally, I'm just going to leave this video with some more dyno polls so you can actually see this thing in action and hear it as it is without my annoying voiceover. Thanks again for watching.